I'd like to offer some images or archetypes of a Dhamma practitioner that you can use to identify with. And, it's really interesting. The Buddha spoke a lot about anatta in Pali, which means non-self, the sort of lack of an inherent self, which uh, I'll get to perhaps another day. Um, but there's a lot to Dhamma practice that involves actually working with, building up, and playing with a particular sense of self, which I think is very useful, practical, and appropriate, depending on where we are in our practice and on the path. So of course there are times where we want to identify less and lower the sense of self and go towards this non-self, this not identifying with, not taking personally. But for many of us, um, the sense of self is constantly being propped up, right? The Buddha said this is something that's deeply entrenched. So we can also practice Dhamma by sort of, if we're going to be telling ourselves this story of self, to kind of find our agency, take the reins, and become the storyteller, right? We know on some level that we're empty of any inherent self, but the mind has this habit, this deeply entrenched habit structure of building, telling stories of the self. Oh, I'm like this. Why am I this way? Or oh, look, I'm this is amazing. This is who I am, right? These positive and negative stories. Um, so what would it be like to kind of embrace that? And if you're familiar with my teachings, you'll know that I speak of myself sometimes in these ways of sort of like a warrior or a hero. And this is an archetype I really like and I find it really helpful. And it's actually something the Buddha did. And in the suttas, you'll see many times where the Buddha proclaims himself in this kind of way, and as well as many devotees and people who meet the Buddha will talk about him in this way, that as a great conqueror, a hero. So we'll start there. One archetype or image that we can use is that of a hero or a conqueror or a warrior, which I really like, a spiritual warrior. And in this practice, we are indeed at war with what are known as the kilesas, the defilements. And the kilesas are these three corruptions and phenomena that defile us. Desire, it's mostly called greed, but greed, lust, desire, it's all part of the first one. The second one is aversion, hatred, hostility. And the third is delusion, fundamental ignorance, which comes in many different layers. There's the ignorance about what is skillful and what is not. And on a deeper level, there's the ignorance of believing in self, believing that things have an inherent essence or existence to them, including the self and others in the whole world. But anyway, we can think of practice as we are warriors fighting this ongoing battle against the kilesas, against the five hindrances. Um, I'll just spitball a bunch of different images so that if you're listening, you can think about if you like any of these or if you want to play with any of these in your day-to-day life. So another image is that of a gardener, someone who is tending to this beautiful, you think of it as like maybe a huge botanical garden or this natural preserve acres long in Hawaii or something, or whatever image you like. Or maybe it's a plot of land like a farmer. And so all the time these weeds are coming up of the hindrances, right? And the five hindrances are desire, aversion, stagnation, dullness, lethargy. That's the third. The fourth is of restlessness, agitation, compulsion, worrying, and the fifth is paralytic doubt, anxiety. Right, I'll say that again. The first hindrance is desire. Anytime we feel a sense of lacking, inadequacy. The second is aversion, it's hostility, hatred. Anytime we want to push something away or criticize or judge. The third is dullness, lethargy, stagnation. The fourth is worrying, restlessness when the energy is dialed too high. And the fifth is paralytic doubt, anxiety. So the gardener is constantly pulling out these weeds, and in their place, he or she is planting these beautiful flowers and trees that bear fruit, like all the positive qualities that the Buddha encouraged. Things like energy, effort, determination, generosity, virtue, love, loving kindness, metta, compassion, karuna, equanimity, upekkha, appreciative joy, sympathetic joy, mudita, um, generosity, warmth, peace, wisdom, power, strength, samadhi, collectedness, passaddhi, tranquility. So many beautiful qualities. So the gardener is tending to this field, this plot of land. He or she is touching the earth. And, when I think of this image, there's a sense of just the smell of dirt and grass and nature and just the beauty of nature is involved in this image for me. And you'll notice, or hopefully, or maybe I'll point out in case you don't notice, that this is all internal, right? So the first image of the warrior who's at battle, he or she is the battle is happening inside that person's mind. This is really important, right? Because sometimes we can think of, oh, it's okay, I'm a warrior. When someone else is shouting at me or insulting me, I need to, uh, you know, penalize them in some way. But no, it's all happening internally. We're not blaming anything or anyone out there. That's not something we can control. Where our domain as the warrior is internal. And just like that, the gardener's domain or field of land is internal. Um, we can that gardener can think of, a kind of related image is that of a someone who is nourishing. So it could be like a mother or a cook, a chef. Um, when I if you watch these like Netflix shows about great chefs, a lot of cooks talk about not just that they have a great palate and they're well trained in these fancy chef schools and all that, but they also talk about the love of nourishing, of giving. Um, my father-in-law is a great cook, I can and I can see how when he gets so much pleasure from cooking great food and having as many people over as possible to take that food. Um, so there's pleasure we can take from these images. You know, that's the whole point of this exercise is to play with these different archetypes or images and evoke qualities that are helpful for us. It could be pleasure, bravery, courage. Um, this image of a warrior I like as a defense against any fear that arises. Um, and right now there's uh, a phrase that's coming to me that I'll paraphrase from a woman who was a follower of the Buddha. I believe this was uh, a bhikkhuni, a nun or monk, female monk, um, who was quite accomplished in the Dhamma. And she said something to the tune of, um, I'm not afraid of fear. I'm not afraid of death. My teacher is adept in the deathless, where fear, where death do not exist. Um, and I'll explain this just a little bit. I know this is a little bit of a tangent, but a beautiful one, hopefully. I'm not afraid of fear. I'm not afraid of death. And I remember being a little kid repeating this to myself, and I was so afraid of fear, so afraid of anxiety. Anxiety would be the thing that would come up, and I would be fear struck, paralyzed. This, by the way, is the fifth hindrance. And so it would go eventually, but I developed a fear towards fear. And so I found this phrase really helpful. I'm not afraid of fear. I'm not afraid of death. My teacher, which is of course the Buddha, is adept in the deathless. The deathless is one of the words that he uses to describe nibbana, awakening, unbinding. The nibbana dhatu or ayatana, the awakening element or base. Um, so the deathless is this, I'm speaking poetically here, we can think of it as a realm, a dimension of reality that we can step into and dwell in and learn from. And that's what arahants or enlightened beings are. They're beings who have experienced nibbana and who have a deep relationship with nibbana. So in that place, there is no fear. Of course, there's no time, there's no self, there's no world, there's no other, there's no phenomena. So there's nothing much we can actually say about it. And be precise. We can't be anyway. This is Nibbana, right? So this bhikkhuni is saying, I'm not afraid of fear, I'm not afraid of death because my teacher is adept in the deathless, where fear, where death do not arise. So beautiful. So another image can be that of a devotee, where someone who is really devoted to Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, devoted to the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, this triple gem. And um, I really like that. The Buddha had said, when you protect the Dhamma protects you. So Dhamma is something that provides. When we go to it seeking refuge, it provides refuge. And um, it's one of these things where, depending on who I'm speaking to, I might say something like, "Oh, you don't have to be Buddhist. You don't have to worship or be devoted." Which to some extent is true. You can live a spiritual life and practice without that quality of devotion being turned all the way up. You have to start with where you are. And so if you don't know anything about Buddhism, why would you be devoted? You might not be devoted to the Buddha, right? Um, but actually devotion is really important. And what ought to happen over time as you become uh aware of and exposed to the teachings of the Buddha is there should be a recognition of like, whoa, this is really deep. It's really practical, strategic, effective. It works. And when we take these teachings into our own heart and we start to feel our heart rising, and then we start to realize, oh, I was really drowning in suffering all this time. I didn't even realize it, but I was drowning. And I can feel myself being uplifted by this person's words. There's such a wisdom and clarity and effectiveness to these teachings. So devotion ought to arise, and it can be very powerful on the path. So that image of someone who is devoted, a devotee, is powerful. Um, oh man, there's so much I could say about this. Sometimes I like to think of myself as a prince of the Dhamma, a Sakyan. The Buddha was born Siddhartha Gautama, the prince of the Sakyan clan, this particular kingdom and clan of people in India. And it was foretold by these seers, these sort of fortune tellers in ancient India, that this prince would either become a world conqueror or he would become a great spiritual ascetic. And so his father, the king, Suddhodana, wanted his son to be this conqueror. He wanted his kingdom to expand and kind of did everything he could to prevent his son from going the spiritual route. Um, but the Buddha went the spiritual route, and now his kingdom, his great conquering of his own heart, and his kingdom of the Dhamma, or the Dharma, as it's called in different countries and languages, that kingdom still exists today. So many empires have come and gone, so many kingdoms have risen and fallen, but Dhamma is still here. And the Sakyan, the name of the Sakyans, that name has outlived all the other Indian names or kingdoms in this sense, in the sense that here I am as Sri Lankan American living in America in 2024, and I like to think of myself as a Sakyan. So the irony there is not lost. The irony of what King Suddhodana wanted for his child and how his child actually eternalized, in a way, the name of the Sakyans. But I digress. Yeah, other images. It could be that of a builder, and I'm thinking of Game of Thrones, how the Watchers on the wall, there were these great builders within that house that built this great wall. So if you like carpentry or building, you can think of yourself as someone who's building a great fortress, born of wisdom and virtue, born of peace and calmness. You could take the archetype of a scientist, someone who's experimenting. Remember, Robert Bea talked about some of these images. That of a scientist, someone who's experimenting, really, testing out these different theories from the Buddha, testing out, okay, what's it like to really uh, put on this lens of metta, of loving kindness, or this other lens of equanimity and evenness. What happens in my day if I really adhere to that? How's it different from the day before? The control group, right? Rob also talked about the image or the archetype of an artist. And so for some of you, that'll really speak to you, that of someone who's painting this great blank canvas, painting it with all these different colors, and you can think of each of the colors as different qualities of the heart, right? Um, you could take the archetype of a great ruler, a king or a queen, one who's responsible for the kingdom, and that whole kingdom would be your energy body, including your physical body and all the mental qualities that arise in your being. And so that of a ruler is responsible for order, maintaining. And as you can tell, you can take any image, any archetype. It could be the trickster, the joker, the one who's like sort of like Loki in Marvel. It's the Norse god of, I think he's a trickster god, right? Land the Lannister in Game of Thrones, and um, I have a particular friend who I'm thinking of who can be very sort of tricky and clever. So that image or archetype is one who's trying to think of clever solutions and sort of tricking the defilements, tricking the hindrances, really playing with. It's a very playful sort of image. Anyway, there could be many, many different archetypes, but what I'm really getting at is we can practice with these. Um, so for me, sometimes when I'm really rocked by a hindrance or a defilement, let's say I'm getting into an argument with someone, I can bring one of these images up and it's really motivating. It's really inspiring. Like that of a warrior with a blade sharp and remembering my call to arms. Remembering, okay, here's anger and frustration, annoyance. It's arisen in me. It's not my job to argue with that person, to try and change them. It's my task. I'm remembering I'm a warrior. It's my task to cut through that defilement within my own self. That is my job. It's being strategic. If it's remembering, okay, that's what I'm supposed to do. If I do that, I will feel well. This suffering that's arisen in me, this intensity, that'll be cut. Then I can deal with whatever I need to deal with more skillfully. But I need to do that first, right? If I were to use that image of the nourisher, the gardener in that same instance, it would be in that instance, you can dial into how malnourished you feel when you're angry or if you're sad or upset or feeling fearful. You can feel how you feel depleted, drained. And you can remember this image of the nourisher, the grower, the healer. Let me nourish my spirit with this beautiful nutriment, this food of Dhamma, the best and highest food. Let me let me come back to the body, nourish the heart. So hopefully this gives you an idea of this kind of practice of I'll have to think of a title for this, you know, playing with the sense of self or, using different images and archetypes. Um, and from here I leave this to you, to go out in your lives and to try this out. Um, see whether or not it's effective. So I offer this for your reflection. May all beings share in the blessings springing from this practice. By the power of these blessings, may all be well, happy, and peaceful. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Buddhang, Dhammang, Sanghang, Namasami.